In February 1949, police raided a warehouse in Leopold Road, West Sussex, owned by John George Haig. Inside, they found several 40-gallon drums and containers of concentrated sulfuric acid. Outside, they found 13 kilograms of dissolved human fat, a piece of a human foot, human gallstones, and part of a denture. It was clear to investigators from the presence of acid inside the warehouse what had happened. Haig had killed someone and dissolved their body in acid to cover up his crime, Breaking Bad style. However, what would come as a shock to the investigation was that he had done it before and was planning to do it again, had it not been for one small mistake. Before we start the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. John was born on July 24, 1909 in Stamford, Lincolnshire, England, into a conservative, religious family. His parents were members of the Plymouth Brotherhood, a strict Christian group. The family later moved to the village of Outwood, Yorkshire. John's father was an engineer and was a very conservative man who feared that the sins of the outside world would seep into his purified family. He surrounded his house with a solid wall, leaving his child only 10 feet of space to move around behind the fence. The child was often severely punished for the slightest missteps, and often the punishments inflicted on him resulted in physical effects or injuries to his body. It appears from the family's biography that the couple, John and Emily, were the kind of parents who did not hesitate to use severe physical punishments against their children. It seems that the result of this strict type of upbringing was reflected in the boy, who suffered in his youth from what he called religious nightmares, or nightmares related to faith, and among those nightmares that John saw was a recurring dream in which he saw a forest of crosses dripping with blood, and he also saw once a man, in the dream, cutting down tree trunks to drip into a cup in his hand, blood flowing from between those cut trunks. The nature of John's nightmare dreams indicates that, apparently, as a result of the type of upbringing he received, religion within himself became the cause of all the troubles, difficulties, and various types of deprivations that he suffered. Those nightmares would have a very evil and cruel reflection on John's life later. But despite all that, the boy was talented in playing the piano, in which he received home lessons. He was also excellent in his studies, as he won several prestigious school awards, one of which was a scholarship from Queen Elizabeth Grammar School. His nightmares did not prevent him from joining the choir of Wakefield Cathedral, where he became a cantor. John continued his studies as a conservative despite his usual excellence. He graduated as an engine engineer and worked in a company specializing in his field of study, but at the age of 25 he was arrested and jailed for fraud just months after his marriage. After his imprisonment, his new bride left him, and his conservative relatives decided they wanted nothing to do with him. After serving just 2 years in prison, John Hay was released and moved to London, where he became a chauffeur. However, despite serving time in prison for fraud, he continued to con good, unsuspecting people out of their money. He pretended to be a solicitor called William Adamson. He regularly sold fake shares in the estates of his deceased clients at below-market prices. He was eventually caught when one of his clients realized he had misspelled his fictitious name on a legal document in 1939. He was arrested and imprisoned again, this time sentenced to 4 years for fraud. While in prison, Haig realized that his greatest weakness was that he left his victims alive to report the crimes. Haig spent the rest of his time in prison making plans to eliminate any witnesses to the crimes he intended to continue committing upon his release. He began researching the French murderer Georges-Alexandre Sarret, whose signature was to dissolve his victims in sulfuric acid. Using his free time, he developed 2 of his own methods for dissolving bodies using different forms of acid by experimenting on rats. Eventually, he discovered that it took a small field mouse 30 minutes to dissolve, and was able to calculate the amount of acid and time it would take for a full-grown adult man. 4 years later, after being released from prison and armed with his terrifying knowledge, John George Haig took a job at an engineering firm in the accounting department. Shortly thereafter, he ran into an old friend named William McCowan, who had worked as his chauffeur. McCowan told Hay about his new venture as a landlord, collecting rents from tenants living on his parents' multiple properties. Although he had a well-paying job at the engineering firm, Hay grew jealous of McCowan's apparent lavish lifestyle and the little effort he seemed to put forth. A few months after meeting him, Hay lured McCowan to an abandoned basement and beat him over the head. Using his new method of disposing of bodies, Hay placed McCowan's body in a 40-gallon drum and filled it with concentrated sulfuric acid. 2 days later, McCowan's body was nothing but handfuls of sludge, which Haig poured into a sewer. Enjoying his success in the killings, Haig took over McCowan's duties as a landlord, telling the McCowan family that he had run away to avoid conscription. However, when McCowan's parents became suspicious, as their son had not returned home after his enlistment, John George Haig murdered them as well. After taking their money and possessions, Haig moved into the Onslow Court Hotel in Kensington. However, the approximately $10,000 he had stolen did not last long, as he developed a gambling problem. With his money running out faster than he expected, Haig was forced to find another wealthy couple to rob and kill. After pretending to be interested in a house that was for sale, Haig murdered the owners, Dr. Archibald Henderson and his wife Rose. The Hendersons' bodies were disposed of in a warehouse in Gloucester, where the McCowan family was also murdered. The warehouse seemed the perfect location, as it was relatively remote and had a sewer outlet into which human filth could be easily disposed of. After 5 murders, John Haig rented a larger warehouse on Leopold Road with more space for his barrels and acid mixture. Here he would kill and dissolve his final victim. Olive Duran Deacon was a wealthy widow who lived at the Onslow Court Hotel with Haig. Olive believed she was an inventor, and upon discovering that Haig worked for an engineering firm, she asked him to talk about an idea she had for false nails. Haig took the opportunity to lure her to his warehouse, where he murdered her. Olive Duran Deacon was the body discovered by investigators outside the Leopold Road warehouse. Unlike previous disposal sites used by Haig, the Leopold Road warehouse had no drain or access to a sewer. As a result, Haig could not quietly pour the sludge into the sewer, forcing him to dispose of it in a pile of rubble behind the warehouse, where it was easily discovered by investigators. Upon the discovery of Olive Duran Deacon's body, Haig was arrested and charged with murder. He became known in the popular media as the acid bath killer, offering insanity as an excuse and claiming that drinking his victim's blood had rendered him insane, although there was no evidence to support that he had actually consumed human blood. After hearing his insanity defense, an arresting officer told prosecutors that Haig had asked him about his chances of being released from a mental hospital, as opposed to prison. The jury took only a few minutes to return a guilty verdict against Haig, and he was sentenced to death. On August 10, 1949, John George Haig was executed for his crimes. Here we come to the end of the story. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to like and subscribe.